There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside a house where someone has stopped loving you. Not the peaceful kind, not the quiet after a long day. The kind where you can hear your own heartbeat a little too clearly. The kind that hums underneath every conversation, every meal, every good morning that doesn't quite sound like it means anything anymore. I grew up in that house. A 3-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Lane with a wraparound porch and a garden my mother had been tending since before I was born. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even particularly special by most standards. But it was ours. And for a long time, I believed that word meant something. My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how I lost my home, and then quietly, legally, took everything back. Let me give you the picture as it actually was. My mother, Diane, is 71 years old. She has early-stage osteoarthritis, a heart that occasionally misfires in ways her cardiologist monitors closely, and the kind of stubborn warmth that makes people want to protect her. She should not have been living alone. Everyone agreed on that. And so 3 years ago, I moved back into the house on Birchwood Lane to take care of her. I want to be precise about what that meant. I paid the electric bill, the gas, the water, the homeowner's insurance that had lapsed, because my mother hadn't noticed the notice. I bought the groceries. I drove her to her appointments on Tuesday mornings, sat in the waiting room with a laptop, and worked while she talked to her doctor about her inflammation levels and her calcium supplements. I coordinated with her physical therapist. I ordered the specialized mattress that helped her sleep without waking up in pain. I did all of this while working remotely as a technology consultant, which is a job most people don't fully understand, but which pays well when you're good at it. And I am good at it. I was not looking for recognition. I want to be clear about that. I was not building a ledger in my head, tracking favors like a debt collector. I was taking care of my mother because she needed to be taken care of, and I loved her. And that felt like enough. What I did not fully account for was my sister. Vanessa is 4 years older than me. She is the kind of woman who has always moved through the world with the absolute certainty that it was designed for her comfort. She was the golden one growing up. The one with the big personality, the loud laugh, the friends who spilled through the front door on Friday nights. My mother adored her in the particular, helpless way that some parents adore the child who demands the most. Vanessa married Garrett 6 years ago. Garrett is the sort of man who has a very firm handshake and a very loose relationship with accountability. He'd been in and out of real estate ventures that always seemed to be right on the edge of breaking through. He drove a leased BMW and wore watches that were slightly too expensive for someone who kept needing to refinance things. They lived 40 minutes away in a house they'd purchased with a large home equity loan taken against its value. They came to Birchwood Lane on Sundays, sometimes. Garrett would stand in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. He didn't make himself and talk about the market. Vanessa would sit with my mother and let my mother look at her like she hung the moon. I would be in the background, having already cleaned the house, already prepared the food, already handled the week. Nobody mentioned that. The first sign that something had shifted came in February. Vanessa called me on a Wednesday evening, which was unusual. She didn't typically call me. She texted, and even then, it was usually something that didn't require a response. "Mom's house is too big for her to manage alone," she said. I sat with that sentence for a moment. I was in the house at the time. I had been in the house for 3 years. "She's not managing it alone," I said. "I'm here." "Right," Vanessa said. "But Garrett and I have been talking. We think it makes more sense for us to move in. We'd be better positioned to handle the financial side of things." I asked her what she meant by the financial side of things. She told me that she and Garrett were thinking about taking over the household expenses, that they had plans, that they had ideas about the property, that Garrett knew a contractor who could do some renovations that would increase the value. She said this, as if I had not been the one paying the bills. As if the house were simply an asset waiting for the right management team. I said I would think about it. I did not say what I was actually thinking. which was that something had already been decided. And this phone call was not a conversation. It was a notification. The Sunday they arrived with boxes, I understood. It was a Sunday in March. Cold still. The garden just beginning to show the first green edges of something coming back to life. I was home. My mother was home. And Vanessa and Garrett pulled into the driveway in Garrett's BMW with the back seat full of boxes and the energy of people who had already done the math. Garrett unloaded boxes like a man who owned the place. Vanessa explained to my mother, in that warm theatrical voice she used for important announcements, that they were going to be moving in, that it would be wonderful, that they would all be together. My mother looked uncertain for just a moment. Then she looked at Vanessa. Then she smiled. I watched this happen from the hallway. Over the next 3 weeks, things changed quickly. Garrett talked about the guest room as if it were an investment opportunity. Vanessa rearranged the kitchen. Small things at first. The kind of things you could rationalize if you were trying very hard not to see what was actually happening. Then came the conversation about my room. It was a Tuesday. My mother was at her appointment. Vanessa sat across from me at the kitchen table, with a cup of tea she held in both hands, and she told me, in a very measured, reasonable voice, that they needed more space. She told me that I was, and I remember this word exactly, underutilizing the primary bedroom. She said that Garrett worked from home and needed a proper office. She said that my room, which had been my room since I was 9 years old, was the logical choice. She said she was sure I understood. I asked her where she expected me to go. She said there were some nice apartments not too far away. That it would probably be good for me. That I had been here long enough, and maybe it was time for me to have my own space. She said this with the genuine, uncomplicated confidence of someone who had never once considered that I might not simply comply. I said I needed some time to think. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that I had been subsidizing this house for 3 years, that my name was not on the deed because my mother had put it in her own name when my father died, and that I was beginning to understand with cold, complete clarity how entirely exposed I was. The eviction happened on a Friday, not a legal eviction, nothing that formal. Just a Friday afternoon in April, when I came home from a client call to find that the locks had been changed. I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in, with my key in my hand, and the key did not work. I knocked. Garrett opened the door. He was wearing a fleece vest and holding a coffee mug. And he looked at me the way you look at someone who has arrived at the wrong address. "Oh," he said. "Vanessa said she'd handle this." Vanessa appeared behind him. She was holding a large black garbage bag, which she held out to me with both hands, the way you hand something to someone that you want to be rid of. "Your things," she said. "The important stuff. We packed what we could find." I looked at the bag. I looked at my sister. "You changed the locks," I said. "We're making some changes," she said. "It's Mom's house. We're taking care of things now. Where is Mom? She's resting. She doesn't need to be part of this." I stood there on the porch of the house where I learned to read, where I cried after every hard thing, where my hands knew the texture of every wall. I stood there with a garbage bag of my own belongings, and I looked at my sister's face, and I saw something I had been trying not to see for months. She was not conflicted. She was not even slightly uncomfortable. She believed she was completely within her rights. And that was the moment I understood that this was not a family dispute. This was a power calculation. And she had made hers. I took the bag. I walked to Miyake. I did not cry, not then, but I was already thinking. There are 2 kinds of responses to being wronged. The first is loud, immediate. The slammed doors, the screaming in driveways, the group texts that fracture a family into factions and get screenshot and recirculated for years. That kind of response feels like release. It looks like power. It almost never is. The second kind is quiet. It is the response of someone who has just that feelings are not the currency that matters here. Information is, time is, precision is. That is the kind of person I decided to become on the drive away from Birchwood Lane with a garbage bag in my back seat. I did not call Vanessa. I did not text her. I did not reach out to my mother that night. Though that was the hardest part because I needed my mother not to be in the middle of what was about to unfold. I checked into a hotel. A clean, anonymous business hotel near the interstate with a desk and reliable Wi-Fi. I ordered room service. I opened my laptop, and I began to think very carefully. The first thing I did was call an attorney, not a family lawyer, a real estate attorney named Patricia, who had handled some contract work adjacent to one of my consulting clients. I explained the situation in plain factual terms. I explained that I had been effectively removed from a property where I had been residing, that my name was not on the deed, and that my mother was the legal owner. Patricia listened without interrupting. Then she asked me what I wanted to accomplish. I told her I wasn't sure yet, but I wanted to understand the full picture. She told me that without my name on the deed, my position as an ousted occupant was weak. My mother could legally allow whoever she chose to manage her property. I hadn't paid rent in a formal, documented way. My contributions were real, but largely invisible to any legal framework. Then she said something that made me pause. Do you know if there are any liens on the property? Any loans taken against it? I told her I didn't know. She said to find out. I am a technology consultant. I solve problems by finding information that other people haven't organized yet. I find gaps between what systems say and what reality is. That is genuinely what I do. So I went to work. Public property records are more accessible than most people realize. The house on Birchwood Lane had been in my mother's name for 11 years. What I found when I pulled the records stopped me mid-breath. 18 months ago, my mother had signed a home equity line of credit against the property. The lender was a mid-tier regional bank. The credit limit was significant, enough to suggest that someone had persuaded my mother that this was a good idea, enough to make me think about Garrett and his renovation plans and his investment opportunities and his BMW that never quite made sense on the income he claimed. And then I found the default notice. The loan had not been maintained. Payments had gone irregular, then stopped. The bank had issued a formal notice of default 4 months ago. The property was approaching the threshold where the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings. My mother did not know this. I was almost certain of that. Because if my mother had known, she would have told me. And if my mother had told me, I would have fixed it immediately. Vanessa knew. Garrett definitely knew. They had engineered a financial crisis against my mother's home. And now they were living in it. And I had been removed so that there was no one inside that house who might notice or intervene. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Patricia back. Can I buy the defaulted debt? I asked her. She was quiet for a moment. Walk me through what you're thinking, she said. I walked her through it. When a mortgage or a home equity loan defaults, the bank's primary interest is recovering the money it's owed. In certain circumstances, particularly when the loan has aged past a certain point in the default process, banks will negotiate the sale of the debt to a third party rather than pursue the full cost and timeline of foreclosure. It is not common knowledge. Most people don't think to ask. But it is a real mechanism, and it is entirely legal. I had the savings. 3 years of living expense-free, of paying bills that should have been split, of not taking vacations or renovating apartments or leasing BMWs. I had been quietly accumulating the kind of financial cushion that only makes sense when you live like you're waiting for something. It turned out I had been waiting for exactly this. Patricia said she would make some calls. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of negotiations I was not directly party to, which Patricia handled with the careful, understated efficiency of someone who knew exactly which door to knock on. 6 weeks of documentation requests and counter proposals, and a bank that was ultimately more interested in recovering a clean sum than in managing a protracted foreclosure against a 71-year-old woman. During those 6 weeks, I found an apartment. A good one, actually. Quiet building, good light, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in. I furnished it with the things I'd accumulated slowly over years of careful spending. It was the first space that had ever been entirely mine. And during those 6 weeks, Vanessa's family began to sense that something was wrong. The voicemail started in week 3. The first was from Vanessa, and it was warm. Disarmingly warm, in the way of people who have recalibrated and decided warmth is now the better strategy. Hey Chloe, it's me. I've been thinking about everything, and I feel like things got really tense and I want us to talk. You know how things get. I love you. Call me back, okay? I did not call back. The second voicemail came 4 days later, this time from my mother. Her voice was gentle, a little uncertain, and it broke my heart in the specific way that only your mother's voice can. Chloe. Honey, I don't really know what's going on, but Vanessa says you've been upset, and I just want to hear your voice. Please call me. I called my mother back immediately. I want to be clear about that. I did not use my mother as a chess piece. I talked to her for 40 minutes. I told her I loved her. I told her I was okay. I told her we would talk soon, in person, and that everything was going to be all right. I did not tell her what I knew about the loan. Not yet. The third voicemail was Garrett. Garrett had never called me once, in the 6 years he had been married to my sister. Not once. We exchanged the bare minimum of pleasantries at family gatherings, and otherwise operated in a careful mutual avoidance that suited us both fine. So when I saw his name on my phone, I understood that the temperature inside that house had changed. His voice on the voicemail was controlled. The voice of a man who was accustomed to negotiating, and who believed he was still in a position to do so. Chloe, Garrett, listen. I know there's been some friction lately, and I think we all just need to sit down like adults and talk this through. There's some stuff going on with the property, some financial things, and honestly, having you involved could be really beneficial for everyone. I think we could work something out that makes sense for all of us. Give me a call. Beneficial for everyone. I listened to that voicemail twice. He didn't know. Not specifically. But he could feel the ground shifting, and he was reaching for whatever handhold he could find. And apparently, I was now that handhold. I did not call back. The fourth voicemail came from Vanessa, and the warmth was gone. Chloe, I don't know what you think you're doing, but we need to talk. There are some legal things happening with the house, and I need to know if you've been talking to anyone. This affects Mom, okay? This affects all of us. You need to call me back. This is not a joke. It was not a joke. She was right about that. In week 6, Patricia called me. The bank had accepted the offer. I was now the lien holder on the home equity loan against the property at Birchwood Lane. I held the debt, which meant that Vanessa and Garrett's continued occupation of that house was now, in a very direct and legal sense, contingent on terms that I would set. I sat in my quiet apartment with the good light and the kitchen, with enough counter space, and I let that settle. Then I called Patricia and told her it was time to move to the next step. People often imagine that moments of justice arrive with noise, with confrontations in driveways, with raised Doppler voices, with the dramatic reversal of a scene from a movie where the wronged party finally gets to say everything they held back. They imagine fire. Real power doesn't move like fire, it moves like water. Quiet, patient, finding the exact shape of whatever vessel it occupies, and then holding that shape completely. I called Vanessa on a Thursday morning and asked her if she and Garrett would meet me at Birchwood Lane on Saturday. I kept my voice pleasant neutral. The voice of someone who had perhaps had a change of heart. She said yes immediately, which told me everything I needed to know about the state of their anxiety. I arrived on Saturday at 10 in the morning. I wore something simple. I carried a leather document folio that Patricia had helped me organize. I knocked on the door of my childhood home and waited. Garrett opened it. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. His handshake was still firm, but it was the firmness of a man holding on rather than a man in command. Vanessa was in the living room. She'd arranged herself carefully, the way people do when they've been rehearsing. There were fresh flowers on the coffee table. An offering. My mother was not there. Vanessa had arranged for a neighbor to take her to the botanical garden for the morning. I had expected this. I had planned for it. I sat down. I did not make small talk. "I want to show you something," I said. I opened the document folio and placed 3 sets of papers on the coffee table beside the fresh flowers. Garrett's eyes went to them immediately. Vanessa's followed a half-second later, and I watched the color begin to shift in her face as she registered what she was looking at. The first document was the notice of default, the original one, issued by the bank 4 months ago. The one that told them they were losing the house if the balance was not resolved. "You've seen this," I said. It was not a question. Neither of them spoke. The second document was the assignment of debt, the legal record of the bank's transfer of the home equity loan to a new lien holder. I watched Garrett pick it up. I watched him read the name on the document. I watched his face do something complicated. "That's you," he said. "That's Mas," I said. Vanessa reached over and took the document from him. She read it. She put it down. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, which was the expression of someone who has just realized they fundamentally miscalculated. "How?" she said. "Carefully," I said. The third document was the one that mattered most to me. Not legally, emotionally, structurally. It was the outline of a trust I had established with Patricia's guidance. A protected financial trust, funded from my own savings, designated solely for my mother's care. It covered her medical expenses, her physical therapy, her groceries, the maintenance of the house she had lived in for decades. It was structured so that no one, not Vanessa, not Garrett, not any future decision made in a moment of confusion or manipulation, could redirect those funds. My mother would be taken care of. That was the thing I had always cared about. That was the thing I had moved back to Birchwood Lane to ensure. And now it was insured in a way that could not be undone by a phone call or a guilt trip or a lock change. I slid that document across the table. "Mom is going to be fine," I said. "That's not something you need to worry about." I told them plainly what their options were. The debt I now held was legally enforceable. I could pursue collection, which would begin a foreclosure process that would result in them losing the house. Given that the house was my mother's primary asset, this would be damaging to everyone, including her. And it was not what I wanted. Alternatively, they could agree to a formal arrangement, one in which Garrett's name was removed from any informal control over the property decisions. One in which Vanessa acknowledged, in writing, the financial contributions I had made over 3 years. One in which the house was properly managed for my mother's benefit, with full financial transparency, overseen by an attorney. I was not asking them to leave the house. I was not taking my mother's home away from her. I was not performing cruelty. I was simply making the terms visible. Garrett started to say something about lawyers. Vanessa said my name in the tone of someone who was about to say, I was being unreasonable. I let her say it. Then I said very calmly, "You handed me a garbage bag of my things on this porch and changed the locks. I think we both know what unreasonable looks like." She closed her mouth. I called my mother that afternoon, after I had left the house and the papers were signed, and Patricia had a copy of everything. I took her to dinner, a place she liked, with good soup and a corner booth, where it was quiet enough to talk. I told her everything. I told her about the loan. I told her about the default. I told her about what Vanessa and Garrett had been doing, with the finances she had trusted them to manage. I watched my mother's face move through several difficult things. Then I told her about the trust. I explained it as simply as I could. I told her that no matter what happened, she was going to be okay. That her house was going to be okay. That her doctor's appointments and her physical therapy and her garden were going to be okay. She was quiet for a long time. Then she took my hand across the table, and she said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't have to be sorry," I said. "You just have to let me take care of you. That's all I ever wanted to do." There is some things I want to say, directly, to anyone who is listening to this, and recognizes something in it. about the instinct to make yourself smaller so that someone else can feel bigger, about the way that kindness, real and unconditional and genuine, can be read as weakness by people who have decided that kindness is a real resource to be extracted rather than a gift freely given. I took care of my mother. I paid the bills. I drove to the appointments. I did the quiet, invisible work that holds a life together. I did not do those things to earn anything. I did them because she was my mother and she needed me. But I also allowed myself to believe that love was a sufficient protection, that being good, being present, being reliable would be enough to keep me safe inside the story of my own family. It wasn't. And when the people I had been quietly sustaining decided I was an inconvenience, when they handed me a garbage bag and changed the locks, I had two choices. I could have raged. I could have become the version of myself that they expected. Messy, emotional, easy to dismiss. Or I could get quiet. I got quiet. I paid attention. I did the research. I made the calls. I signed the papers. I protected my mother through legal mechanisms that cannot be undone by a conversation, a manipulation, or a guilt-soaked voicemail. And then I sat down at a coffee table with fresh flowers on it, and I showed my sister calmly what I had become in the months since she handed me a garbage bag. Not a victim, not a supplicant. A woman with a document folio and a very clear understanding of what she was owed. Not revenge, not cruelty. Just the quiet, permanent, immovable fact of someone who finally decided that her kindness was worth protecting too. I still talk to my mother every day. The garden on Birchwood Lane is coming in beautifully this year. She sends me pictures sometimes. Peonies near the fence. The rose bush that survived another winter. I look at those pictures in my apartment, with the good light and the kitchen, with enough counter space. And I think about how much lighter it is to love someone freely, without fear, when you have done the work to make sure that love is no longer a liability. That is what it cost me to learn, and I will not forget it.